guys, it's Chelsea from The Financial Diet. And this week's video is brought to you by ourselves. I wanted to talk to you guys really quickly, instead of a normal ad, about the very exciting thing that we're launching here at TFD, which is our all new Patreon. So we are expanding our membership, the Society at TFD, over to Patreon. If you are already a member on YouTube, you don't need to move over. It's not going anywhere. We're just expanding to Patreon with a few additional perks. We have 2 tiers where you can contribute at a $7 or $12 level. You'll get ad-free bonus content, office hours with me, access to our book club, our community on Discord where you can chat about money and other things, plus everything you see listed here. It's important for us as a company to be a self-sustaining machine so that we can continue to cover the topics that are important to us and speak candidly about the things that matter, and supporting us on Patreon is one way to help us do that. You're not just supporting us, you're also getting tons of awesome perks as well. So click the link in our description to join us on Patreon. And today I wanted to talk about ways in which I used to be sabotaging myself without even realizing it. Now, for those who don't know, I will link to my video on the subject in the description, but I am in the process of publishing a novel, which will come out in June, that I'm really, really excited about it. You can learn all about it at the video in the description, as well as the book's website, which I will also link to. And I wrote and I'm publishing that book all while, for example, running a 7-figure media company as the CEO, aka The Financial Diet, having flourishing personal relationships, engaging in all the hobbies that are important to me, including becoming a bike person, which was a huge achievement, and having plenty of time left over to do things like watch endless hours of Love is Blind. Although I must admit that watching Zach sing this season has shaved years off of my life. Every time someone on Love is Blind breaks out a musical instrument, like I can feel thousands of cells in my body decay. It's the worst experience. But anyway, I don't say all of that to sound unusually self-aggrandizing, although I am. I mostly say it to say that I feel confident that at this point in my life, I have achieved a level of balance and productivity that really was not available to me even just a few years ago. And that's both in terms of the actual work that I'm doing, but also in terms of how I view myself and the relationships in my life, and the ways in which, as I say in the title, I was kind of undermining and sabotaging myself. So I wanted to talk about those specific ways and what I do differently now, not because the things you want to achieve or the type of person that you want to be is identical to my life, but because I think that these bad habits are things that many of us struggle with and could probably benefit from taking a second look at. And for me, these previous habits and the changes I've implemented, and huge shout out to therapy, which we'll talk about all through this video, which was really crucial in kind of making some of these changes, fall into 2 key categories. 1 is confusing process for outcome, and 2 is discerning what and who is actually important. We just finished up a 3-week series here on TFD all about the insidious ways that social media can infect our self-perception and our lives, which we will also link to in the description. But it's worth noting that social media does play a huge part in a lot of these previous bad habits, and although I still use social media today, I do feel that I have a much healthier relationship to it, and it's not affecting me in the same negative ways that it used to be. Not that all of these problems are totally modern, but let's just say having a 24/7 judgment and comparison machine available in your pocket whenever you want to look at it certainly doesn't help. So without further ado, here are the 5 little ways that I used to sabotage myself without realizing it. Number 1, to my previous point, is judging myself on the process rather than the outcome. I recently made a TikTok about a phenomenon that I have become quite critical of over the years, which is our cultural attachment to the idea of waking up early in the morning as some sort of inherent marker of value or worth or seriousness. Not only is our society in general quite oriented around morning people, we also tend to take it to extremes. I mean, for example, when I was in high school, my school started, like your ass was in the seat learning at 7:17 in the morning. That's when the bell rang. That should be illegal. Like, I graduated high school with a 2.5 GPA, maybe even less now that I'm thinking of it. And I think part of that was because I was literally asleep for half of it. Like, I would frequently just fall asleep in class. Like, that is not normal. And I do have delayed sleep phase in the sense that I do tend to go to sleep naturally quite a bit later than some and wake up naturally later than others. My ideal scenario, if I never had to work or participate in our morning person oriented society, would be falling asleep somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m. and waking up somewhere between 9 and 10 a.m. I generally tend to now err toward about midnight to about 8 to 8:30. Again, mostly for work reasons. And that is a change that has both felt sustainable and also allowed me to do things that are important. And I do want to be clear that some people simply do not have the choice to sleep on the schedule that is optimal for them. And also, some people just prefer to wake up really early and go to bed really early. Both of those things are great. But for people like myself who tend to be night owls, or really any other type of habit or preference you have in your life that is simply kind of how you're wired and not in a vacuum negatively affecting you, there's a real tendency to judge ourselves on the way we do things rather than what is the outcome of the things we're doing. I used to berate myself for not being a morning person, for not having that independent spark to get up early and meditate and read interesting books and work out and drink green juice and do all the stuff that I thought would make me a more worthy person. And even though there weren't negative outcomes to the natural schedule that I preferred to sleep at, especially when I was freelance, for example, it still really conflicted with what was my optimal self-image, which was almost entirely informed by other people's perception. And I want to be clear that sometimes there are things which are actually in need of change. For example, I've spoken on this channel before about my ongoing battle with being addicted to sugar to some extent. And there are times in which my relationship to consuming sugar is genuinely problematic. I don't feel good, it can affect my sleep, I find myself more lethargic, my overall eating habits will take a nosedive. So when I look at the outcomes as it pertains to the sugar question, there are clear reasons to interrogate and modify. But being naturally a night owl is simply not one of those things. And to tell the difference now, a few questions that I ask myself are, does my insecurity in this area come from how I feel or from how other people might feel about it? And two, is it having negative consequences in my life or preventing me from doing the things that I want? Happening to work better in the mid to late afternoon and then in the evening after dinner for a bit is just the way I work. And as long as it's not affecting my life in any way, I really don't care what kind of person I am or what other people might think that it makes me. And applying this standard to various habits and personality traits is a really good way to stop beating yourself up for something that was never a problem to begin with. Number two, in terms of the social media of it all, is having very unhealthy following habits. So my approach to social media now is if something makes me feel not optimal for even 1 second, that's an immediate mute or an unfollow, depending on the situation. I just simply get it the hell out of my face. There are a lot of things that I see. For example, perhaps it is someone who is achieving things that I really want for myself, and I feel in a place of insecurity about that in the moment, and seeing it doesn't make me feel good. No shade to them, but I gotta mute that. Maybe someone has a really gorgeous aspirational house that I couldn't afford or just don't have the resources to create at this time. That's going to be an unfollow. And it took me a while to realize this, but now I have understood that outside of people that I genuinely am close to and want to keep in my life, almost every other follow on social media should be run through a pretty strict cost-benefit analysis. For example, in work, sometimes we have to follow people for professional networking reasons, whether on regular social media sites or on LinkedIn or what have you. And there sometimes can be tangible benefits to forming and fostering those connections. For example, right now we're in the pre-order period for my novel, and a huge part of that is reaching out to various influencers and book talkers and media and journalists to send them a copy of the book and hopefully get them to love it and talk about it. And if these are people that I already have a connection with, usually via social media, where we've kind of been mutually supportive and in each other's digital periphery, there is a real benefit to that. I won't lie. And so when thinking of the cost-benefit analysis of having this person on my feed, that's something that is really weighing in its favor. And vice versa for when they're reaching out to me about their projects. But the number of people for whom fostering a connection via social media outside of your actual personal life holds real tangible value for you and is worth keeping in your orbit is pretty low. And especially when it expands to things like influencers or other aspirational figures, it's really easy to conflate being inspired with just feeling bad about yourself. For example, I basically follow almost no home decor stuff anymore because that shit is bad for my mental health. Clinical psychologist Rachel Andrews says she is seeing more and more envy in her consulting room from people who, quote, can achieve the lifestyle that they want, but which they see others have. Our use of platforms, she says, amplifies this deeply disturbing psychological discord. I think what social media has done is make everyone accessible for comparison, she explains. In the past, people might just have envied their neighbors, but now we can compare ourselves with everyone across the world. And Wendy Dryden, one of the UK's leading practitioners of cognitive behavioral therapy, calls this comparisonitis. So my rule, as I said, is just, if it doesn't make me feel good for even a second, I get it out of my face, at least temporarily. Number 3 is sharing things before I'm sure about them. Now, not to take it back to my novel, but I worked on it for about a year in all different capacities before I announced anything publicly. Prior to that, it was just a very, very small group of either people I was collaborating with on it professionally, or very close friends and family in my own life. And this was really hard for me because I used to share everything early on all the time. In fact, looking at TFD, it initially started as my own personal blog that I was using to hold myself accountable to getting better with money. And it can have benefits, right? Extrinsic motivation can be very powerful, especially for people who naturally tend to respond to it, myself included. But it's also important to remember that extrinsic motivation can be a double-edged sword. As two kinds of behavior drivers on the extreme ends of a spectrum, extrinsic and intrinsic motivation have entirely different but one-sided outcomes. Eventual loss of efficiency is a risk that often follows the instant success of external motivators. And while internal motivation has the ability to keep momentum going for a longer period, it has limited sustainability. But it also explores the finer aspects of joy, a sense of accomplishment, and fulfillment. However, there is a risk of emotional exhaustion if not compensated with external rewards. Basically, you want a really good blend of both external and internal validation. And especially when we're working on something really challenging or really exciting, there can be a desire to get credit for it early on in the process, which is something that I used to really struggle with. It was really hard for me to do things without sharing them because A, I did want that credit, but also B, I just didn't feel like it was real if other people couldn't see it. And while I still really lean into external motivation, I think it's good to find a few key people who can help provide it while allowing you to fine-tune whatever it is that you might be working on before announcing it or releasing it to a wider pool. Oftentimes when we share things too early, especially if we're not totally sure about them, we end up pivoting or abandoning the effort altogether or deciding that it's not for us, which, if done before you've shared it with a wider group, is totally fine and part of the process of refining our own decisions. But if you've already shared about it and then have to walk it back because you weren't sure enough or ready enough in the process to share it in the first place, now it's going to feel like a failure. Now it's going to feel like the next time you share something, it shouldn't be taken as seriously. It's going to undermine your credibility, and it's also going to undermine how you feel about your own decisions. It's gone from the very key process of refining into the very potentially damaging process of having to backpedal. Now, when it comes to external motivation gone wrong, number 4 is holding people to the standards that I created for them. So one enormous shift that I made through therapy, shout out to therapy, was changing how I related to people who were close in my life. I honestly used to be extremely critical to people because I was almost always perceiving them through a prism of what I wanted for them or what I thought would be the best move for them. And honestly, looking back, that's an objectively deranged way to relate to other human beings. No offense to my former self. But this behavior and habit was honestly on the verge of costing me some pretty important relationships in my life, and it drove me to go to therapy seriously for the first time as an adult because I realized that if I didn't change how I was doing things, it was really going to start negatively affecting my life in a big way, to take it back to point 1. And an important clarification to make here is that learning to accept people on their own terms does not mean learning to accept any kind of treatment. As Psychology Today puts it, accepting people does not itself mean agreeing with them, approving of them, waiving your own rights, or downplaying their impact upon you. You can still take appropriate actions to protect or support yourself or others, or you can simply let people be. Either way, you accept the reality of the other person. You may not like it, you may not prefer it, you may feel sad or angry about it, but at a deeper level, you are at peace with it. That alone is a blessing, and sometimes your shift to acceptance can help things get better. Now, I still obviously have boundaries in my own relationships, but I make a very, very clear distinction with everyone in my life, and I do it by asking myself a few questions. Does this thing they are doing or thinking actually affect me in some tangible way? If yes, how can I create boundaries for myself and change my own behavior or relationship to this person to be okay? And if no, why is this something that I feel compelled to address? Basically, you take people as they are and you decide to what extent you want to be in their life or have them in yours. But once you're having a person in your life, you don't get to then stage direct and edit them to be the person you want them to be. Really making that clear distinction between what affects me versus what just bothers me for reasons that are mine to figure out and resolve has been life-changing. Lastly, number 5 is overvaluing the opinions of people who don't matter. So I am in the process of fielding all kinds of reviews from people I don't know on my first work of fiction. It's hard. I'm not gonna lie. It's hard not to take it all very personally and live or die by each person's response. But ultimately, while this is a particularly trying gauntlet, in general, I have made enormous strides in my life when it comes to discerning whose opinions are actually worth taking into account. Because I used to be extremely affected by basically everyone's opinion. And aside from just being generally toxic to mental health and well-being, it also in many ways prevents us from doing and creating and building and enjoying the things that are most important to us in life. We would basically never have the confidence to go out and do something worth doing if we were constantly undermining ourselves by the opinions of everyone we've ever encountered, or even anonymous people on the internet, which, back to the social media point, can be essentially limitless now. We're constantly exposed to everyone's opinions and feedback and responses in a way that is just not natural for the human brain. And ultimately, while you can fall too far to the "I don't care what other people think" end of the spectrum, which is often typified by assholes who honestly need to be caring more about what people think, there's a massive difference between valuing the opinions of people whose opinions carry real weight in your life and letting the noise of 1,000 takes cloud your own internal barometers, which I was constantly doing. So I've actually found it very helpful to write actual lists of people whose opinions and tastes and critical feedback really matter to me. And I tell them as much, and I seek out their counsel, and I will run things by them, and I will solicit feedback and take their notes. But outside of that, it's very important to understand that not everything is going to be to everyone's taste. Your choices may offend other people, and it's not just about work. For example, my choice to not have children has been difficult for certain people in my life. And while they're in many cases people that I love and respect, it's also true that not everyone gets a say in everything. And for a lot of personal choices, the list of people whose opinions really matter is essentially one: you and maybe your partner. At the end of the day, taking critical feedback in a way that is actually productive can be one of the best things that we do. But not all feedback is created equal, and not all of it is worth taking in or letting affect you in any way. And switching to a much more limited scope of who I'll actually really take into account has been life-changing. Those are just my little habits that were sabotaging me. I'm sure I could name 1,000 more if I thought about it, but I'll leave you with those for now. And the time has come for this week's Society Questions, which, as a reminder, all of our Society members, and you can become one by hitting the join button or joining us on Patreon, get to ask me questions every month that I answer exclusively here on the Tuesday videos. I answer 2 a week, so let's jump into them. The first one says, currently I have a sole proprietorship that I'd like to turn into an LLC. The problem, maybe not really, is that I'm also planning on starting another business within the year, and both businesses work in media or communications, but with different target audiences. I'm debating if I should combine them despite the audiences being so different. One targets nonprofits, the other targets self-published authors. Turn them both into LLCs or turn only one into an LLC. I'd love your thoughts. In general, my advice is if you have a business that will do multiple things, but ultimately has very similar deliverables, revenue streams, workflows, even if the audiences are different, I think it's okay to have them be the same business. You obviously want to make sure that your accounting is very separated so that you can actually get a good assessment of, where you're making and losing money and stuff. But I really only recommend having separate businesses because it adds work, it adds money, it adds complication. Having separate businesses when the actual nature of the work that you're doing is very, very different for each. So like, for example, if one of your businesses was a pottery business and the other one was a social media business, that might be something to separate. But if you're doing a business that has pretty similar work, but for 2 different types of clients, I think it's okay to have that be under one umbrella. Second question is, what has helped you discover your personal style? I'm struggling with mine because it's changed a lot, especially since I, like you, have changed socioeconomic statuses from my childhood and parents, and I find myself struggling with presentation. I love your style, but I also love a more casual, bright, print-heavy look. Thanks. Very sweet. Thank you. The number one thing that I really recommend doing is a lot of inspiration boards. I always have several of them going at any given time. I frequently find that the things that I like are
not what happens to be trending on social media or happens to be on, you know, in the windows of stores. It'll often be inspiration from movies or, you know, older magazines or, you know, stuff, more archival stuff. Like I think trying to tune out of whatever happens to be popular at a given time and tune into what you are naturally attracted to aesthetically is really, really important, because often I think one of the things that leads people to feel the least empowered and wonderful in their clothing is when it hews too closely to whatever happens to be trending, regardless of whether or not that's your aesthetic or that happens to look good on you. So using inspiration all the time. And I like to curate full on like I use Canva a lot, where I'll put together outfits with stuff that I have. And anytime I do my closet turnover, which I'm doing tonight as it happens, from fall, winter to spring, summer, I always make sure to really edit when I'm putting things away and when I'm taking them out, to make sure that I'm only keeping what I always refer to as my A-list clothes, because often having fewer items, but items that you feel your best in, will often make you feel like you have more abundance than having too many items that you don't love. But thank you. I appreciate the compliment.
And as always, guys, thank you for watching. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to come back every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday for new and awesome videos. Goodbye.